My mom lives just across town and she's been wanting a picnic table for her backyard, so I decided to whip her up this picnic table as an Easter/Mother's Day gift. This picnic table is primarily constructed with a couple 2x12x12s with some pressure treated 4x4s for the legs to manage ground contact. I spent the bulk of one afternoon milling everything down for the picnic table and then came back the next day and ripped the last edge off. As I'll be doing mostly hand-cut, stacked, and tussed mortise and tenons here, I want some quarter saw material. Therefore, I'm cutting boards around the center, essentially eliminating the pith and allowing the growth rings to run mostly perpendicular to the board's face. This is an old Jay Bates trick that was passed on to me by my buddy PJ, and I find it works pretty well for making the best out of construction-grade material. I've marked the legs and cut them by hand on one side, making sure to get the end of the beam perfectly square before cross-cutting it on the table saw with a stop to get 4 perfectly even legs. To lay out my joinery, I've really adopted the Japanese carpentry principle of center line. So I'm marking center on the ends and then snapping an ink line on all 4 sides to mark my mortises from. The idea being that if everything is measured off your center line, even if the boards are slightly off in dimension, the joinery itself will still be perfect. Now a marking gauge is set to the depth of the picnic table top, as this is a Parsons inspired table. The legs will actually sit flush with the picnic table surface. Now, a stacked mortise and tenon or intersecting mortise and tenon isn't a novel joint by any means. Essentially, the tenons on the aprons will be half the width of the apron itself. Therefore, when they sit in the mortise, they'll actually pass each other and operate as part of the mortise wall for the other tenon. So I go ahead and measure out the full length of the apron on the leg and then just divide that by half to get my tenon's dimension. The joint allows my apron to be the same height all the way around while maintaining the strength and integrity of the mortise and tenon joint. For the aprons that run the full length of the table, I felt like trying a different technique and opted to use my first side as a router template with a flush trim bit. I start with a top bearing bit and then move to a bottom bearing and then just knock out the rounded inside corner to ensure a proper copy. I don't know if this really saved me that much time, but it does ensure 2 perfectly identical pieces. A panel gauge marks the distance from the seat to the tabletop, and from there I use the picnic table apron to mark the tenon for the seat. I'm just using this board as a bit of an arbitrary reference, and once I'm ready to do the seating, I'll cut the tenon to fit said mortise accordingly. Then the bulk of the waste is hogged out on the drill press, which does get a fair bit messy. I've certainly said it in other videos, but when cleaning up mortises, the often correct order of operations is to sever your end grain first before working on your long grain. This will prevent your blade from getting caught in those long fibers that remain connected, which can steer your chisel into a bad spot and also then keep you from having a nice clean sidewall. As the legs sit flush with the picnic table top, I mark out the notch with the tabletop board and then trim and cut by hand. Now, my initial picnic table design called for a cantilevered seat that was joined to the leg with a drawboard mortise and tenon. I opted to do an angle board to maximize strength at the intersection of the tenon and the leg itself. In hindsight, I still could have used this design, but as we'll get to in a bit, I opted for something that provided a bit more rigidity in the leg structure, even though it wasn't 100% necessary.
The next day.
So after the cantilever debacle from yesterday, I ended up going on Instagram and just sort of posting a quick little reel on the whole failure and the tipping point, etc. and kind of crowdsourced some information to try to figure out a way to salvage this without sacrificing a lot of the design. I got a number of different explanations. Some were really good, some were really, really bad and were kind of killing the entire design aesthetic. The winner was sort of just the simple idea of moving the seats a little bit closer to the table itself and not having as great an offset. It does make it a little more annoying to kind of get in and out. As I'm sitting here right now, really I have to kind of rope one leg over. There's not a ton of room to sort of slip in comfortably. But realistically, that's kind of how all picnic tables are for the most part. Another thing that I'm sort of considering too is actually removing these cantilevered seat rests and just running a board all the way through. And that'll actually give this a little more rigidity. It's not really gonna help too much as far as the cantilever aspect of it, but it will prevent my legs from ever wanting to sort of kick inward, which is something that is a possibility depending on where it's sitting. So yeah, with that said, I'm gonna get cracking. Honestly, just taking this all apart, like, I mean, in this heat, definitely worked up a sweat. I mean, that was pretty intense. Okay. While I had everything apart, I used the domino to start the mortise for the tusk part of the tusked mortise and tenon. I'm using my largest bit and then I'm setting it to the widest setting and approaching from both sides. And then using my kana, I'll go ahead and take off all my layout lines and get all the base components to final dimension. The mortise for the tusk has to be at an angle to be able to draw the joint tighter together. Think a drawboard mortise and tenon, so I've got about a 3 to 4 millimeter offset between the one side and the other. I'm frankly just eyeballing the angle and I'll cut the wedge tusk to fit each individual mortise. And since I opted to go with the through tenon for the picnic table seats to rest on, I've got a fairly lengthy bit of hammering up ahead. Once I get to the appropriate depth, I do a half-blind peg, which in this instance is an old broom handle I once used as a rolling pin about 10 years ago or so. Don't call me a scrap hoarder, even though it's absolutely true. When you're tapping in that half-blind peg, keep your ears open and listen for when the peg bottoms out. The sound of the peg will change as it makes contact with the bottom, and that's when you know to stop. Cutting the wedges is just an exercise in hand-eye coordination. Be also mindful of grain direction because you can have this happen to you. When tapping in the tusk, it's important to not force it too much. Just get it seated and then hit it one more time gently and you are fixed. And then it's just rinse and repeat on the other side. Since I'm not joining the picnic table top together as I want gaps for water to pass through after it's fully assembled, I'm opting for battens on the underside to sort of cheat and keep everything fairly flat. I'm using the domino to drill a slotted hole and then I'll flip the board to the other side and switch out my bit for a smaller one and drill another hole with a smaller mortise setting. That'll give me a slotted hole for a screw to sit in and allow for seasonal wood movement. I'm opting for metal Z-clips to attach the picnic table top to the base, so I'll use the domino to just drill the holes for the clips to nest into. I'll do the same for the seats as well. For finish, I'm opting to use milk paint from the Real Milk Paint Company with the outdoor additive. Interestingly enough, I've been using their oil finishes for at least 5 years now, and I've yet to actually use their milk paint on anything. Since this picnic table is going to be outside and our South Florida sun is undefeated in regards to destroying wood, I figured an opaque finish would give this the longest life possible. After it dried, I came back with steel wool and pure tung oil to burnish the milk paint and simultaneously apply a waterproofing oil finish. Tung oil brings out an unmatched richness in the paint. And then on site, I'll attach the picnic tabletop to the base and voila, we are done. Now, I don't know if this is the ultimate picnic table or whatever clickbaity thing I can possibly say, but it is a fun take on the traditional build with a unique look and design. I certainly encourage everyone to think outside the box and challenge their skill sets by experimenting with design with or without plans. The experience from adapting to the design issues and dealing with those speed bumps of failure is invaluable, and in my opinion helps you become a better woodworker along the way. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here at Cowdog Craftworks.